Welcome to the Read a Difference session of the 2020 UVU Forum on Engaged Reading, Love of Reading Conference. Our goal in this session is to deliver something beneficial to your teaching right now, to continue developing your students' love for reading. We also believe this will be beneficial to parents who find themselves more involved in their children's education than ever before. Recently, we visited with teachers who were recipients of the Read a Difference grant and talked to them about their experience. They are going to share with you key aspects of how the Read a Difference grant influenced their teaching. First, let's talk to Drs. Ann Sharp, Lorilynn Brandt, and Douglas Gardner, the principal directors of the Read a Difference grant. We would like to express our appreciation to the Coford Family Foundation and State Farm, who provided funding to the Read a Difference program and made this video possible.
Thank you, Kirsten. We're glad to be with you today. A very important part of the Read a Difference program are the principles of reading motivation. We'd like to take a minute and share with you a little bit of background and introduction information about each of the principles. And choice.
Yeah, choice is the very first one. It kind of undergirds all the other choices, all the other principles and practices. We think of choice as being a chance for students to be able to decide for themselves what kind of books they want to have read to them, maybe what kinds of books they want to read themselves, and many other aspects that choice comes in. Lori, tell us about collaboration.
Next one's collaboration. Students enjoy working together, and to include that in the underpinnings of the activities that teachers do makes a big difference in how much they engage.
Right, and one of my favorite is control, because I think of control as being the chance to really teach children the skills required to learn how to read. All of those very important basic skills like phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. We can teach them the skills and we give them control over their reading. The more control they have over the reading, the more they're going to want to read. Those children who really have control over the reading are the ones who read the most. So we want to give them control.
Next is authenticity. Students have to see or feel an authentic reason for doing the task. If that's not already built in, the teacher has that job to help them see that, or that they get to, in the choice element, get to choose some of the elements that make it authentic for them.
Can I take proximate reward?
Yes, please.
So proximate reward is the reward that you give to the students. A lot of times in reading motivation programs, we give pizza certificates or gift card to do something. That's not very proximate to reading motivation. If we want kids to be motivated about reading, then, for example, we can give them books, something that's closer to what you want them to do. And believe it or not, when you give kids books for rewards, it increases their motivation for wanting to read books.
Okay.
Yes, and challenge is another one. Challenge is tricky because we want to give them appropriate challenge. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. If you give them too much, then it can be overdone. If you give them too little, then they get bored. But if we can give them appropriate challenge, the challenge itself is so motivating. Oh my gosh, I just finished doing something really hard and I did it. And it's a really motivating principle. So challenge is a really great one.
Trying to think which one we...
Technology?
Technology. These students have grown up in a world of technology and they interface well with it. Picking appropriate and ways to use technology helps them build a desire to read and engage in the reading process.
Thank you for that. Thank you for those descriptions. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn the time back to Kirsten. Kirsten is going to have a number of conversations with students who participated in the Reading Motivation Grant, their parents, and also the teachers who participated in the Read a Difference grant. Now, in their conversation, listen for the principles of reading motivation coming out as they give examples, of, particularly the teachers, of how these principles were implemented in the classrooms.
I'm here with Terry Webb from Springside Elementary, and you teach 4th grade, right?
I do.
Okay, and last year you participated with the Read a Difference program, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So tell me about What benefit did the program have towards you and your collective team?
I think the biggest thing that was amazing about participating in the whole experience was just having somebody that was there to validate how important reading was for the age group of kids that we teach. Our kids are between 9 and 10 years old when we have them in 4th grade, and that's actually one of the biggest ages of kids that the desire to read drops off. And so I think it was just really great to have the support of the fellowship program to just back us up and validate for us that the amount of time and energy that we were spending on helping kids learn to love to read was worthwhile, and also gave our principal an opportunity to know that, hey, the 4th grade team is unified and working towards this goal of getting kids to love reading.
Tell me how you worked together with your team to increase reading motivation for your students. Can you think of a specific example of something that you and your team decided, this is one thing we need to do?
One of the greatest things I think we did as a team is we did a monthly book club. And that was something that we hadn't done before, so it came about because of the fellowship that we did. But basically every month we selected a couple of books that the kids could choose from, and it was completely optional. It was a choice for the students. That was one of the big criteria that we felt was really important. But each month the students had sometimes 2, sometimes 3 or 4 different books that they could choose from. All were based on a theme. We did some mystery, kind of scarier stories for October. We did Earth books for April, things like that, where the kids had an opportunity to choose which book they wanted to do. And then each month we would do a culminating event that focused on whatever books the kids read. We did an escape room for October, and we did for Earth Month, we did some, beautify the earth and save the earth kind of things. The kids went out and made just beautiful drawings with chalk and out on the playground, and just positive messages about keeping the earth clean and beautiful. So that was one of the things that really unified us as a team, because we had our entire 4th grade participate in those things. And so it was a really fun opportunity to know that the kids from all the different classes were reading the same books and had a chance to talk about them and have an activity at the end that kind of just wrapped all of it up into a neat little package. One of my most just heartwarming moments was I got a birthday gift from one of my parents, and it had a letter written inside of it that said, "I don't know what you're doing, but my son has never wanted to read before, and now he doesn't want to go to bed because he wants to be reading every night." And that moment almost brought tears to my eyes, because I was like, that is what I'm here for. That is our goal in all of this, is to get kids to love reading. And I've seen that with several of my students, where their parents have just said, you know what, they never really loved reading, or they only wanted to read Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And so the monthly book clubs and the different activities that we did as a grade level really helped to get kids reading things that they wouldn't have read otherwise. And part of it was because they wanted to participate in the end of month activity, but that kind of was just how it started. And then the more we got into the different books, the more the kids just wanted to read. And so that was really awesome. The second year, we decided, we don't want this to be a punishment. We want the kids to still have their recess. And so we ended up just switching it so that nobody missed anything that they were excited about. But it was always voluntary. Even when the kids did miss their recess, almost always the kids wanted to participate, even if they knew they were going to miss their lunch recess that day. So it was totally optional, just like reading the books was optional. Nobody had to do it. Nobody was forced to do it. And we also were very adamant about, if the kids picked a book and they didn't like it, that it was okay to abandon it.
So it sounds like to me that choice and proximate reward were two very important parts of these motivational practices that you were using and your team was using. Are there any other of the motivational practices that you felt like played an important part in your success with the Read a Difference program?
Yes, I think that the authenticity factor was really huge for my class. I was always very honest with my students in my own reading life. And I felt like one of the things I tell my kids every year is that I hate graphic novels, right? The kids love them, but I still read them and they see me reading in class every day. I felt like that was really important that I read alongside of them. And it's usually only for about 10 minutes. It's not a lot of the day, but my favorite moments are when the kids see me reading something and then they want it next. Just to give you an example, last year I was reading one of the I Survived books and I heard my little students whispering like, oh, she's reading the I Survived book. And they want it after that. They know that I've been reading it and so they are excited to share in that. And I just think that them seeing me as an actual reader, not only in the classroom, but in my life, because I do tell them a lot of things and I do share with them even my grown-up books that I'm reading and that I read professional development books. So they see me with all of those different types of books. So they see that I'm authentically a reader. It's not just something I'm telling them to do without doing it myself.
Is there anything that you would like to, any feedback or advice that you would like to give to teachers who are watching this and wondering about how they can really instill a love of reading in their students? What would be that one thing you would tell them?
Choice. Let their kids read what they want to read. Certainly there's a time for using programs or guided reading books or whatever you have at your disposal, but just letting the kids decide what they're going to read and giving them time to read every day. Because if they're not reading at home and they're not reading in class, they're not reading. So I think it's very important for teachers to make time every single day to not only let their kids read, but read to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm here with Jenny Whitlock. She taught 4th grade at Fox Hollow Elementary and participated in the Read a Difference grant with UVU. And we're going to dive into some of her experiences with it in her classroom and how her students might have been influenced. What did you feel was the best method for you to show your love of reading to your students?
Building my classroom library was one. I felt like when I had a lot of books available, they knew I loved reading. I feel like connecting with them and recommending books to them was a big part. I'd have my reluctant readers that maybe didn't know what to read or would, pick a different book every day, read a page and grab a new one. And I tried to find what they were interested in and ask them about it and make recommendations and talk about what I remembered from the book, either if I read it as an adult or if I remembered it from a kid, or sometimes I would even recommend books that I hadn't read and like, so-and-so really liked this one. You tell me if you like it also. And so those were ways that I could show them that I loved reading and that the books weren't just for show, right? They were to be loved and enjoyed. So I feel like all those things are really important, understanding vocabulary and phonics and all that. But I also noticed that my kids that loved to read became better readers. And so I kept instructing them in all those things and teaching them the skills they needed. But the more I could get them to love to read and want to read and read at home, and the better readers they became. And I saw some low readers, I'm sure with some of my direct instruction, but also paired with just reading way more than they ever had, really grew in their reading abilities, which was really great to see.
In regards to your instruction and some of the changes that you and your team maybe implemented or activities, can you describe some of the activities that really manifested to you that love of reading in your students? It was evident and you could not ignore.
Yeah. One of them, I actually solicited, I think I put together an Amazon wish list, and I had friends from my past, like high school or people that I knew, that actually helped purchase some new books for our classroom. And it was around Christmas time, so I wrapped them up and we opened one a day, and they were like more excited for that moment of the day than anything else. But then of course they all wanted to read it right away. So I tried to figure out, okay, how can I not have them fight over a book, which
Yes.
there are worse problems to have in a classroom. Right?
Definitely.
So we would open a couple and then we would do a raffle. And I gave them, I think, 2 tickets and they put their name on it and they were raffling off the right to read a book. Like, so ridiculously amazing. And they were trying to figure out where to put their tickets. And when they won, you'd think they won $1 million. And they didn't even get to keep the book. They just got to read it first. And then they'd have it for a week or 2 weeks. And then we put them back in the raffle with the new ones. And they'd put out their tickets. It was magical because they wanted to read them so badly. And they were new and they were excited. And I probably could have done it with old books that hadn't been, like, ones they hadn't really noticed before. I didn't have to have brand new books. But it was amazing to see they weren't getting anything other than a chance to read a book. So that was one of my favorite activities.
Did you feel like that really reached out to even those students who were maybe struggling readers or reluctant readers and maybe didn't engage in those kind of activities before?
Oh, definitely. And I think I tried to have a variety. We had graphic novels in there, and we had fiction and nonfiction and fantasy. So there was a whole variety that I think appealed to a lot of my students. Proximate rewards, I think, was another big one. We did a big grade level project focusing on Matilda, and all 5 classes read Matilda as a read aloud, and they had to earn a certain number of minutes to be able to go on this mystery field trip. And they didn't even know what it was, but they were so motivated. We told them that it had to do with reading and maybe a couple other super minimal details. And they were in a competition, and they didn't have to win the competition to go, but they were very motivated to seeing, oh, Miss Perrier's class read this many minutes. We've got to read more. And it didn't matter that they were all reading different amounts of minutes either. You know, my kid that maybe was inclined to read 10 minutes, he was reading 25. And my kid that would normally read 2 hours would log 4 hours a night. You know, they all stretched themselves within what they could do. And the reward was we went on a field trip to UVU and we had some actors come and like perform different scenes. And we watched the movie of Matilda and we ate chocolate cake, like the Trunchbull's cake. And they all got their own Roald Dahl book to take home at the end of the day. And watching a bunch of them read. Like some of the buses were silent because they all had their nose in their brand new book, and on the way home we're reading it. It was really cool. So I think proximate rewards was another big one.
Were there any students who maybe weren't really interested and were just like, I don't care?
I think all of mine were engaged in some way. And again, to different levels and different varying degrees, but I think everyone, it was contagious. Like the excitement about it really, I think, filled the whole grade. It was pretty cool.
I love that explanation, that it was contagious. And is that something that you felt like just kind of happened throughout the whole school year? Like, did you feel like there was an increase in a love of reading over the course of the school year?
Definitely. I think that group of kids more than ever before just really loved to read. We did other little things. We did, I think, Flashlight Friday. All that meant was I had a bunch of little dollar store flashlights and we turned off the lights and they would lay under their desks with flashlights and read, and they were so excited. And anything I could do that was more time for them to just enjoy reading made such a difference in those kids. And they wanted to read. They wanted more time to read. They wanted more books to read. It was pretty awesome.
I would love to know, with collaboration being another really big piece, and it's going to be tricky with COVID, what are some strategies that you would recommend to teachers to incorporate collaboration in a way that really enhances that love of reading?
Collaboration was a big one that changed in my classroom because of the Read a Difference grant. I don't think I did as much collaboration in reading. I did lots of collaboration in other ways, but to me, reading was an individual joy and pleasure. But we did a lot more collaboration. Kids would find the same book and then have a chance to talk about it. And I had to let go of some of my silent reading expectations. And they loved talking about it. Last year, I was in 6th grade, and we used Jamboard a lot. And they would each have a different slide, and they could collaborate digitally and add notes about the character or predictions about what they thought was happening next or some big surprises they had. And that was a great way for them to collaborate, and that could continue on whether they have to be separated in the room or if some are at home or in school. I think there's lots of tools that can still be used to let them collaborate and talk about a book, because there's power in reading a same book as your peers. I'm in a book club, and I love to talk and find insights that somebody else had that I didn't have, or get clarification on something that was confusing to me, and giving them that same real opportunity, I think, makes a big difference for them. I think there were so many little things that I could do. In education, we get bombarded sometimes with massive changes. And everything about doing the Read a Difference grant was making small tweaks or making a different focus on what we were doing. Also celebrating things that we might have already been doing and just polishing those, if you will. And so I think doing those little tweaks really made massive differences. And when I saw those kids later, they still would come back and borrow books and talk about things. And I think just realizing it's not a huge new program. In fact, it's kind of stripping away the programs down to what really matters about reading. And it's that love and enjoyment of reading, and how can we get kids there. Some kids are already naturally there, and others need a little push and need help. And I think those principles really make a big difference, especially for those kids who are more reluctant.
I'm here with Cammie Perrier. She teaches 4th grade at Fox Hollow and is a teammate of, well, you were a teammate of Jenny Whitlock previously, right? And they participated in the Read a Difference grant. And we're going to dive into some of the things that she experienced with this grant and learn a little bit more about reading motivation in her classroom and instilling that love of reading. Let's talk about your classroom and the Read a Difference grant. Now, UVU came in and offered some support, some education, and then you as a team got to make decisions about things that you wanted to implement with the motivational practices. What do you feel like your team focused on, and can you give a specific example of something that you did in your classroom that really brought in that love of reading or instilled that engagement that the students sometimes are missing?
Some kind of similar things. It's hard to even remember exactly if we all did the same thing, but I know that we all made sure that we had choice. So the kids for independent reading had the option of whatever books we had available in the classroom, and we tried to have them organized most of us had them organized by genre, so the kids kind of knew what they were getting into, made sure they understood what each genre was, gave them a little sample of what each one would sound like in real life, so they knew like, oh, that is something that would be cool to read more about. So that, making sure there was plenty of choice available. I know a lot of us did favorite bins, which aren't like revolutionary, but they're helpful. We have a teacher favorite bin where we would put our own personal favorites that we read as a kid, or even as an adult, we read some juvenile fiction book and we said, this is a really good one, and we want to put it in there. I know some of us would even like pitch those to the kids and say, I'm putting this in here and here's why. Or let me read a quick page or the back of it, or give you a quick little intro to the story and tell you why. Because again, it helps them get out of their own way. Because just seeing the cover isn't enough, and just giving them enough of a taste that they might want to pursue more helped. We did the same thing, or I did the same thing with the student favorite bin. They could submit a book, and then sometimes we would go through the student favorite book bin and pull out a book or two and say, who submitted this one and why did you submit this book? Why do you think it's good? Don't spoil it, of course, because that's like the plot is sacred and we don't ruin that for each other. But why did you put it in here? And they would just give their classmates a little blurb about the book, and again, a little bit of getting out of their classmates' way of having to go pick up the book, start the book, and take on the whole task themselves. If someone just reads a little bit to you or gives you just a little bit of an idea of what the book's about, it takes away that initial work that it shouldn't be that difficult, but it is. We kind of like, no, I don't want to bother. So when we do that with favorite bins, it was helpful. And I know other teams did the bins. I don't know if we all did the discussions.
That sounds like it was very intentional on your part. Like you really put in an effort to provide opportunities for students to talk to each other about books. Did you feel like it became, it's very intentional at the beginning. Did you feel like it became very natural for your students throughout the year? Like they just started to talk about books more?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my focuses in my class, and it wasn't always like super structured, but for me, because I act partly on what I hear people around me talking about, and I feel like a lot of us do, what we hear a lot from our friends or even media and whatnot, we tend to think more about, and we tend to maybe want to even give a try. We might want to give that particular book a try or movie a try or whatever. So I just noticed that a common sense thing I could put in place was create conversations about books in the classroom. So those favorite bins provided those. We talked a lot about books by like just sitting on our desks and saying, let's just talk about number one, what are our feelings about reading at all? Like how you guys feel about reading. Safe place, you can hate reading. And I tell them, I was a fake reader. I'm just going to come out right now. I was a fake reader. And feel like we're comfortable saying, I don't like this book, or I don't like this genre, or I love this genre, even if it's geeky or dorky sounding or whatever. So we found ourselves having a lot of conversations, because I figured the more you talk about books, the more the kids are going to naturally want to read books and explore a little bit more, because there's this thing that we're all talking about, so it must be more than it seems on the surface if it is something we all are engaged talking about. And the kids are talking about it like it's a show or a movie that they're trying to catch up on, like, what season are you on? Or like, what show are you talking about? Like, no, we're talking about the series of Percy Jackson, like, it's so good. So we would find ourselves having just talked about reading, and then those built into talks about what books we were reading independently, without spoilers, of course. And we'd say, like, I'm really reading a book right now. I stayed up too late last night. My mom was upset with me because I stayed up reading because I really wanted to keep going. We talk about just anything that was happening in our reading lives. Some kids would say, I was trying to read longer for our grade contest, and I realized that I actually like the book more when I read it for longer. And I was like, revolutionary, who knew?
I love that.
But they had to experience that for themselves and realize that huge idea, the new realization that the longer you read a book, the easier it is to get into it, instead of little 10-minute chunks where you can't really get into the plot. So yeah, talking and discussions became huge in my classroom, and we tried to surround those conversations around the topic of reading.
I feel like that's a very easy way for teachers who are interested in boosting that reading motivation. It's very easy and very natural to start talking about literature. It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, and students might not open up about it. You might have those students who are really reluctant, or students who are struggling that maybe aren't interested in the conversation. But the more, I like the way you said it, the more they're exposed to it, the more it's on their mind, the more they're thinking about it. They see their friends thinking about it and talking about it, and they want to be involved. If teachers are looking for an easy way to start just increasing the desire to read, maybe just having conversations, quick little snippets about, oh, what book are you reading? Or this is what I'm reading, or this is what I found, is a great way. Or those book pitches you talked about, and book blessings, like talking about a book that they think is interesting to try and hook their friends and see if they can get them interested. I feel like those are great, easy ways for teachers to start really boosting that reading motivation, like you mentioned. And it sounds like from your experience, your students' behaviors and demeanors towards reading started to change in your classroom.
Definitely. I mean, I feel like, number one, once they felt like, even though like the struggling readers or the kids who are disinterested were able to feel like that's okay to feel that way. I don't have to hide it. Like I always felt like I had to hide it as a low reader. Or an unmotivated reader, that happens, and we all try and find what book works for us and what we like. We're not all going to like the same genre, and that's okay. I forgot what we're talking about.
You're so good. You're so good. We were just enjoying how students their demeanors towards reading can change as they're exposed to things they're interested in, and don't necessarily have to have that one book that's assigned to them.
Right, definitely.
So I just kind of want to ask a couple more things about any specific kind of big, fun, exciting projects or activities that you and your team worked on together. I know you mentioned some contests. Would you like to kind of explain that?
Sure. Our team did a reading minutes contest throughout the grade, kind of a contest. It was more so like a challenge, and the kids were supposed to try and reach a set amount of reading minutes. I believe it was within a 2-month time period, and the classes would decide individually like what their goal was going to be, and then if they could reach that goal that was set, they wanted to be achievable, but they wanted to be challenging at the same time. So if we could reach that goal by a certain time, then we would be allowed to participate in a special experience that the kids didn't really know much about yet, some ending incentive. So we started reading, we tracked the minutes in class, and we had a little bar graph on the outside of the 4th grade hallway that showed how each class in the 4th grade was doing as far as their reading minutes went. So just for the kids who wanted a little competition, and where that competition pushes them a little bit more, they wanted to read some more. They'd get themselves to read an extra half hour or something at home because they wanted their class to catch up or get ahead. So yeah, we did this reading minutes challenge, and the parents would sign a reading log, usually at the end of the week, or the kids would just track their minutes and turn them into their teacher. I think people did it kind of differently in the grade. Some people had them like sign or not sign, just trusted the kids on what minutes they reported. And yeah, as we got closer and closer and saw that we were reached the goal. I mean, of course, you want the goal. You want them to reach the goal. You don't want to be like, we don't get it and it's gone. Sorry.
Right.
But you got to read. That was fun. So, and our ending incentive was getting to participate in a experience with a movie that, the movie Matilda, that went along with a book that we'd all been reading aloud in our own classrooms to our kids and delving into deeply and letting them experience the world of Roald Dahl and his imagination. And so we read that book, and then as we got closer, the kids just knew that we would be going to UVU for something, and they didn't know what for exactly, and it might have something to do with something they've been reading. So we came to UVU, and we saw Matilda on the big screen, and the kids were like, oh my gosh, we just read this! It's the best thing ever! And they got to have some actors who volunteered to play the part of the Trunchbull and Matilda and Miss Honey, and they kind of like brought the movie alive. When we would pause it, they'd come out and do little acting portions and little parts of like the musical, and it was so cool. The kids, I mean, it just brought the experience out even more than just the movie, and the kids got to participate in that. And just hearing them talk and jabber during the movie was awesome, just because you're like, well, that didn't happen in the book, or like, it happened differently in the book, but that's what it looked like, and like, that's what Bruce looks like, that's what Bruce Bogtrotter looks like, and stuff like that. And then afterwards we had cake for them all, like Bruce has to eat chocolate cake, and they all got to have cake, and they got to mingle with the actors and have a lovely little time, and they all took home a book at the very end by Roald Dahl.
So I know that when you start the Read a Difference grant and you work with these awesome faculty members from UVU, you're supposed to select just like one or two things that you really want to focus on in your classrooms. You guys talked about choice. I don't know if you realize it, but it sounds like you guys used almost every single principle. Choice, we've talked about collaboration and that communication piece with the students. We've talked about challenge, and every teacher in their own classroom is trying really hard to challenge those students at the right reading levels. But then of course, here you go on talking about this awesome project or activity and experience, and you've got control. They have this goal of achieving this amount of reading minutes that they set as a class. They have ownership over that, and they have responsibility towards that. So you've given them control over this, and that's one of a really tricky piece to incorporate in reading motivation, because it's hard to hand over some of the control to the students and hope that it turns out okay. But that was a great way to incorporate it, and they could see their own progress with that graph you have in the hall. And then of course you have proximate reward, and seeing Matilda and the actors and the cake all of a sudden brings it real life to them, and they will always look back in their childhood and remember this great experience they had with a book, and it stemmed from a book, and their love of reading may have started growing from this one experience that you provided to them.
Hope so.
I would think so. And I feel like those are very authentic and genuine experiences. And you talked about being, I guess I didn't even think about this, but you talked about being authentic about being a reader, and your students having the opportunity to be authentic and say, I don't really enjoy reading, or I didn't like this book was boring. And giving them that opportunity. You guys hit on so many, your team at Fox Hollow hit on so many of those motivational principles that it's no wonder your students started to change, and their opinions and beliefs about reading started to change. You were embedding so many of those practices in your instruction, and as a team really drove it home and just found opportunities to ignite that love of reading for those students. I think you did a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. Well, it's nice to listen to all this. We should do this more often.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on or express about the Read a Difference program and some of the things that maybe it benefited for you, your students, your team, anything like that?
The Read a Difference program, like Grant specifically?
Yeah.
I mean, it was wonderful to see with the grant funding provided what we could do, but it also kind of opened us up to realizing that we can still provide these same experiences every year, even if it's we're not like busing the kids to UVU.
Yeah.
We can still create authentic and exciting and just engaging experiences for the kids to shoot for. And we still do the reading challenge every year. We still do, so like this grant caused our school to continue doing a reading challenge for our fourth graders every year, continue to get us thinking about how we can motivate the kids to read. Some things have changed a little bit here and there as teachers have changed in and out, but I think the grant had just got us really thinking about reading motivation, because sometimes you just focus on reading levels and the academic accomplishments and how the kids are doing on assessments. And the grant got us started on motivation, and even though it's not something that's brought up in faculty meetings all the time, it's just always there because we got started with that grant. So that's just one way.
So the grant really just was a kickstart for you to focus more instructional time on reading motivation, and
or even
not
like integrated, making sure it's not just assessment, it's not just assessment preparation, it's let's do this comprehension activity and whatnot, but let's make sure we're enjoying what we're reading. Let's make sure we're not just doing this for getting the main idea because we need to know that for a test at the end of the year, but do we even like what we're reading, or is it interesting to anybody? And talking about what else we could read to explore the same topic if we like it, because we're naturally motivated to learn more about this particular topic and whatnot. So it doesn't necessarily have to be separate from the academics, but it can be tied in, and I feel like because of the grant, maybe we tie it in more naturally now.
I think that is a great way to explain it. I was talking with Jenny Whitlock about having the skills to read, but also the will to read. Like, you really do need both, and they go hand in hand. And I think teachers across the world have been having this very heavy mindset about skills. We need the reading skills, the phonics, the phonemic awareness, all of these things. And so much of the will to read is lost because not enough attention is focused on, do we even like this? Are we even going to enjoy reading this? Are my students going to have a good experience with this text? And I love the way that you explain that. And it sounds like the Read a Difference grant for you was just kind of a kickstart to pay more attention to that will to read, that love to read, and that it's still realistic for you to continue. It's not like it was this one glamorized experience that was all perfect and then you can never duplicate. It sounds like you guys have plans in place to continue providing these enriching, exciting experiences for the students.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I'm around, I don't plan on that changing.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your comments and for all of your insight. We really appreciate it. You have been an awesome, awesome resource for us as far as this information goes, and for us to share this knowledge with other teachers. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm here with Ashley Martin, and she's going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Ashley Martin, and I have been a teacher for 11 years now, and I've taught 4th grade and 3rd grade, and I'm currently at Springside Elementary in Saratoga Springs.
What grade are you focusing in this year?
4th grade.
Okay. I want to talk to you about how things have been changed with your team since participating in that program. What benefits has your team experienced through Read a Difference?
There's been a lot of changes. I think the biggest change was our attitude toward reading. I think we stopped looking at it as something we had to do and something we had to assess, and we looked at it more as, okay, how do we really empower students through reading, and how do we empower them to love reading? And the whole mind shift just changed because it wasn't anymore about test scores, and it wasn't about, their reading levels. It was about, do our kids actually like to read?
So what were some of the things that you decided as a team you could do to address reading motivation for your students?
I think one of the first things that we really did was change the way we thought about rewarding reading. And that was kind of a big shift for me. We really focused on making sure that the reward for reading is more reading, and it wasn't coupons, or it wasn't prize box things, or getting to go to Friday Fun. It was, we read because we love it, and the more we read, the more we get to read. And that was a big change, I think, for a lot of us. Another thing that we did is it unified us as a team. As we worked on those 7 practices we learned through the program, we were able to have common conversations about very specific techniques and strategies we used in the classroom that really made it so that we had a common place to come to talk about, and we had the ability to, you know, really dive deep into some of these practices and have a really strong focus.
I love that you talked about how you were able to look into those 7 practices, and I'm really interested to know more. The UVU faculty came and supported you with this program and this grant and provided some education on those 7 practices. Did you feel like there was a lot of things that you didn't know? Did you already know some of it? Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, so a lot of it inherently you kind of know. It's common sense. Of course that, you know, that would breed, you know, motivation for students, but I think we get so bogged down with curriculum and standards and test scores and our students on level and what is guided reading supposed to look like, what is our program for reading supposed to look like. And so as they brought those, it made me excited to teach reading again, and it really opened up, oh my goodness, I can still use the tools that I've been given, and I can still use test scores to inform me about students, but that's not my focus. And it was about really teaching kids to love to read.
So what did that look like when it came to planning instruction and some of the things that you incorporated that were day-to-day? I mean, easy, small things that you felt like, if I do this, it's just going to do a little bit more for reading motivation. Can you tell me about some of those little things you were doing?
Yeah, one of the first things that I did was how I approached reading and the purpose of reading. The purpose of reading stopped being so we could practice this skill or so that we could, you know, practice this strategy, but it was more, we're going to read today for authenticity, and we're going to read because we want to learn more about this, or I just read this really great book and I want to share it with you. And so really when we approached a book or a text, how I approached it changed. Also, one of the biggest things is I realized my kids needed to talk more about what they're reading. And so I embedded time in our day that kids could actually go in and they could talk to each other and they could sign up to share with each other their books. And they had bins that they could place their books in that they've read and that they recommended, and they could write a little something about it and share with each other. And so that was a big shift for me. Instead of book sharing because it was something I was supposed to do, the kids got really excited because they really read what their friends read. And so that was a big shift as well. Another thing was the way I rewarded reading. And every day, you know, if a kid finished a book or something, I would fish for something else for them to read, whether it was the second book in the series, or you liked this author also wrote this. And so getting them excited about reading because they finished something by reading more instead of prize boxes or things like that.
I love that perspective and that connection to that proximate reward and how we really want to reward students with the task of reading or something that connects so closely to reading, to really focus in on, this is what you just accomplished. And some of those strategies and things that you did are so easy. It doesn't have to be like a big activity or anything. It was just helping them find the next book in the series or another author that's similar. And that's such an easy thing that teachers can do. Another thing you mentioned was just making that authentic connection with the students about books. Did you feel like there was a change for your students in that, in your classroom dynamics with reading? Can you describe kind of what you saw in previous years and the year that you did the program, if there was any change in behaviors towards reading?
Yeah, if I approached a book differently, if I said, you know what, I found this really cool book on something we've been talking about, let's dive into it. They had no idea that day that we were going to talk about main idea in detail. They had no idea that that was kind of the standard behind my purpose. But as I approached it, I saw their little ears perk up and they leaned forward and you could see that they were more engaged. Whereas before it was, kind of like, okay, it's something they had to endure. And it was just their facial expressions kind of changed. And I also felt myself being able to give something to my students and let them run with it instead of me feeling like I had to drive that lesson the entire way.
Do you feel like you've seen a big enough change that you could look back at the year you did the program and years that you haven't and say, wow, this really affected my classroom, my teaching, my instruction compared to the years before?
Yeah, at first it felt like a lot more prep, you know, when I was doing the program, that I really had to sit down and be purposeful about what I was doing. And yet, as I started implementing things, I realized a lot of things became easier because it was put in the students' hands, as far as doing their reading homework or doing assignments in class that required reading. It was a whole attitude change, whereas in the past I may not have had as much prep up front because I had a lesson here in a book that I followed, and yet during the lessons it was really hard to get them sometimes through them and to keep motivated all the way through and to keep that energy and enthusiasm up.
So you feel like this just engaged the students more in a natural way, and you just felt like they were more actively involved in reading.
Yeah, and it was engagement that they chose to give me. I didn't have to pull it out of them. It was just the way I kind of approached it.
I love that. I know your school had a very unique activity for one of the proximate rewards. Can you talk to us about what led up to this activity and a lot of what you feel like the students gained from that?
Yeah, so we chose to do a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So we started out by reading the book as a class, as kind of a read aloud. And the kids really enjoyed it. And they didn't know that we had this, you know, kind of plan all along. But we read it in our individual classrooms kind of the month before. And then we decided to have a reading challenge with the whole grade. And that their reward was to have this Willy Wonka event where we brought the book to life. And so what we did is we devised a reading challenge that tried to implement a lot of the practices that we had learned. So they got a lot of choice in the books they got to read for the practice. They had a choice in their goals that they set. And we also had a lot of rewards that required them to read more. And the rewards were centered around reading. So we did kind of a March Madness challenge where every week the kids help set goals for themselves of what it would look like to either increase the amount they read or to challenge each other to read more. And so one of the things they did was they set a class goal of how many minutes they think they could get as a class. And they beat it, and it was easy for them and they enjoyed it. And some kids, you know, might have only read the required amount, but they actually read the required amount, whereas before, I don't know if they really did, and all the time for their reading. And so each week, if they met their goal, and we said it was okay if they didn't meet their goal as well, but they did. And so as they met their goal, we had some kind of fun reward, reading with the first graders or getting a book as a prize, things like that.
So little checkpoints, kind of.
And so we did it for 4 weeks. And if they were able to meet their goals and participate for the 4 weeks in the challenge, they got to, at the end, participate in our Willy Wonka event.
That is incredible. And I think, if I remember correctly, this event was in the library and it was decorated, and it just really brought that book to life and helped the students feel like they got to experience what really happened in the story.
Yeah, we took the library and we decorated it to look like the Chocolate Factory, and we employed the help of parents and our librarian, and they were all so excited about it. It was such a fun opportunity for them to do this for the kids. And so we had different things in the book that we brought to life, whether it was the waterfall or the candy bar that we did, and we were able to watch the movie and compare the book and the movie. So,
do you feel like there are things that you can take away from your experience with Read a Difference that are going to be very sustainable and not just kind of one-time things? Do you feel like there's things that you will continue doing or you'll implement new things going forward?
Yeah, the first thing that was really powerful, I think, was choice, letting kids have choice, no matter what it is. When they have choice, they are more likely to read and want to read and actually follow through with it. And that was one of the biggest things that I thought I was giving my students choice before, but allowing them to say no to a book or put a book away, or even when we're at guided reading and I have this certain book that if I give them a choice, they actually always did better. And it might have been a choice between this book, or you know, what text do you want to read on the screen or off the screen. But when they had a choice in what they read, that really made a difference. And so that's something that I will always implement and find new ways to give my students choice in the classroom.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your insights and your feedback. We are so grateful that you could participate in this program and experience it with your students. Is there anything else that you want to add, or any last words of advice, or anything like that that you'd like to share with the teachers?
Yeah, reading's supposed to be fun, so it's okay to make it fun, and it's okay to not always have that standard in mind. And all that stuff will naturally come, we found. And as you plan and use the principles that we learned that really are sound principles, and got our kids to talk more and collaborate more, things like that, the standards naturally just fell into the reading. And so really making sure that you're focusing on getting a student to love reading and that it's an enjoyable experience, because as adults, that's why we read, you know, and if we think about it that way, you know, we don't read because we have to, we read because we want to. And if we don't want to, we don't do it. And so getting kids to really fall in love with reading really should be the first goal, and everything else will just follow.
I love that new perspective and that focus. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah.